You've been told that capitalism maximizes productivity.
Only capitalism creates a group of people known as entrepreneurs who have no choice but to concern themselves with the needs and desires of others.
In the free market, an individual business owner has an incentive not to be wasteful because they want to maximize profit.
You can't run your enterprise profitably unless you run it efficiently and intelligently, because there's nothing that slips through the hands of a fool faster than money.
In his book Bullshit Jobs, the late activist and anthropologist David Graeber estimated that as much as half of all paid work in the United States was bullshit. That is, work that doesn't need doing, according to the workers that do it. Certain types of clerical work, jobs that exist to compensate for a broken corporate process, and entire industries like telemarketing are just some examples. Here's Graeber talking about this concept better than I can.
Bullshit jobs I define as a job where even the person doing the job secretly believes the job really shouldn't exist. But nonetheless, part of the conditions of employment is that you have to pretend that it does. A bullshit job, you're often given a lot of money, you're treated very well, with a great deal of respect, often seen as the person in your family who most made something of yourself. But at the same time, you're secretly haunted by the knowledge that you're not actually doing anything, that if your job didn't exist at all, the world either would change in no way, or even might become a slightly better place.
Graeber isn't the only one who's pointed this out, and it's not just limited to the United States. In a 2015 YouGov survey of nearly 900 UK workers, 13% said they don't know whether their work is making a meaningful contribution to the world. A full 37% said it isn't. Hey, that's half. 13 plus 37% is half. But if what the capitalists say in praise of capitalism is true, then how can bullshit work exist? How does it affect us as individuals and our society as a whole? If half of paid work is bullshit, is that good? Part 1. The Rat Effect. Once upon a time, the government in France was a colonialist empire. It used to dominate areas throughout Asia, Africa, and the Western Hemisphere. It still does, but it used to too. One of those areas was in Hanoi, located in present-day Vietnam. After the French government began colonizing the area, they put Paul Doumer in charge as its governor general. Among his first major projects was turning Hanoi into the capital of France's presence in southeastern Asia. Part of that transformation included destroying local temples and building a governor general's palace in their place, which seems problematic. It's giving yikes. Additionally, Doumer would order the creation of Hanoi's French Quarter, a place where, you guessed it, the well-off French would live in their mansions so they wouldn't have to interact with the locals. The thing about palaces and mansions is they require flushing toilets, at least according to Paul, and that infrastructure hadn't been created yet. So, along with the new French Quarter came a sewage system. Sadly, not all the shit got flushed. But wouldn't you know it, rats loved sewer systems, and fleas loved rats. And since the research linking fleas to the bubonic plague had recently been published, Paul immediately shit himself, making the investment in sewage infrastructure a bit of a waste. Eager to fix the problem that he himself had created, Paul set a bounty on rats. Well, more specifically, rat tails. For every rat tail someone brought in, they'd be paid 1 cent, which I assume was a lot of money back then. If you offered me a penny today, I wouldn't even take it. So the locals were paid specifically for the tails, not the rats themselves. The, shrewd, among you might expect what happens next year. Pretty soon, the French noticed an odd number of rats running around with no tails. The locals, realizing killing a rat would reduce the rat population and therefore their future income, had followed the incentives given to them. Turn in as many rat tails as possible for as long as possible. Later on, it was found there were rat farms established outside the city for the purpose of breeding rats for their tails. Disgusting. Eventually, the colonists stopped paying for the tails altogether, and the rat problem in Hanoi got way worse, and a bunch of locals died of the plague, which sucked. Some of the colonists died too. Thanks, Paul. By the way, our boy was eventually elected president of France. Great job, France. Part 2. Perverse Incentives. I know what you're thinking. Cool story, internet white man, but what does that have to do with capitalism? Well, according to righttodone.com, one of the top 5 ways to start an article is with number 1. You should know I'm a dad, by the way, so I'm authorized to make one dad joke every 10 minutes. I bring up the rat massacre, which is a strange way to put it. Why do we be like that, historian? I bring up the rat massacre because it's a classic example of what economists call a perverse incentive. That is, a policy or a system that rewards behaviors we don't want. In the rat example, it's payment for rat tails, which incentivizes people when the rat population increases. More rats is not what Paul Dumbass was aiming for. Economists and the news media often frame perverse incentives as something stemming from government policy. The rat effect, or the Cobra effect as it's sometimes called, after the British supposedly did a similar thing in India, is the most often cited perverse incentive. It does happen to be a dumbass colonist government policy to deal with dumbass problems those dumbass settler quads created. But do all examples of perverse incentives involve a government? To review current discourse on the topic, Economist for Dummies author Sean Flynn wrote an article in Forbes titled Perverse Incentives. I want to specifically call attention to the way the phrase perverse incentive is like magical pixie dust that you can sprinkle on shitty arguments to make them bad when the government does stuff. In his article, Sean describes a 19th century paleontologist. At the time, paleontology was a privately funded enterprise who paid Chinese locals for every fossil fragment they brought in. The locals wound up smashing the fragments to increase their payments. Obviously. He goes on to say that when IBM paid its programmers for every line of code they wrote, the employees responded by maximizing the number of lines they wrote. Sean continues, and here, let's quote the article word for word, so you can experience the same level of whiplash I did when reading this. Budgeting also leads to lots of incentive problems. Suppose that you're promoted. What is it with these people? They're fucking hypotheticals.
So let's say.
Suppose that you're promoted to section chief and figure out a way to cut so much waste that you come in 15% under budget. How does the typical bureaucracy react? Do they give you a medal? Do they give you a raise? No. They cut your budget for the following year by 15%. And where does all the money that you saved end up? In departments whose managers were lazy, sloppy, and came in over budget. This sort of incentive structure is what makes it so hard to reduce government waste.
What? Wait, what? Huh? Government waste? Weren't we just talking about a computer company and generic hypothetical business incorporated? When did the government waste enter the picture here? Is there a republic of IBM I don't know about? Flynn continues.
Perverse incentives often arise when governments interfere with markets and tinker with prices. Medicine provides many examples due to the fact that governments try to set prices and reimbursement rates on nearly everything physicians do. Ever wonder why your doctor spends so little time asking you what's wrong, but seems very happy to order a dozen or more diagnostic tests that you don't have any particular interest in?
Hey, what? Doctors order more tests to charge you more money? Okay, let's assume that's true. Where's the government come into the picture here? Is Sean suggesting the test would be free if the government wasn't interfering with markets? If the doctor's pay is tied to how much they charge, then the incentive to perform useless blood tests, which is what we're talking about here, still exists. That's a perverse incentive. Regardless of how much the government says a blood test should cost, as long as it's more than $0, there's a perverse incentive here. It has nothing to do with government policy. Part 3. These incentives aren't very vanilla. At this point, I'd like to share a story from my personal life. By now, you may have guessed I'm employed. on account of the fact that I'm in my 30s, live in the United States, and haven't already starved to death. At one point in my career, I worked at a startup tech company. The company was in an industry that investor types would refer to as ripe for innovation. In other words, a space where the business model was sort of old and clunky and hadn't seen much improvement from the advent of modern technology. I was hired fairly early on in the company's lifespan, more specifically after seed funding, which is when the initial investment gets a product to a workable state, but before Series A funding, which is typically when investors start throwing around big bucks to get everything polished and into the market. But the thing is, from the get-go, the executives and presumably the original investors had been open to funding or buyout offers before the product had even been published. This happens all the time in tech. Microsoft invested $1 billion into OpenAI back in 2019 before ChatGPT had even been announced. Facebook bought Instagram for $1 billion when it had 13 employees and no revenue. Between 2010 and 2019, on average, one tech startup was purchased every single month by one of the 5 largest tech companies. So it's in this context that I had a conversation with one of the company executives, and it really put this thing about incentives into perspective. You see, this executive, we'll call him Jim to make it easy, wanted there to be content, and by that he meant blog posts, on our website, a lot of it, like a new post every single day type content. We had no writers on staff, no budget to hire freelance writers, and the business was not a content-focused organization. I've been in marketing virtually my entire career, and normally this sort of request is a sort of misguided but largely innocuous attempt to gain traction in search rankings on Google. A lot of people who don't do marketing for a living are convinced that if they type enough words and put them onto their website, they'll get more traffic from search results engines. This is the uninformed person's way of sort of flailing at search engine optimization or SEO. Naturally, I called a meeting with Jim and got ready to calmly explain why he was wrong and what we can do instead. After all, having done this sort of thing for about a dozen years by that point, I had had the same conversation with employers and clients more times than I could count. So, imagine my surprise when I asked him what he's trying to achieve with the daily content, and Jim replies, "I just want to get the content live on our website as quickly and efficiently as possible." Okay, I thought to myself, maybe I phrased the question wrong. Instead, I asked, what are we hoping to get out of the articles? Is this a way for us to increase our website traffic? I was hoping that me prompting him would result at least in a confirmation that this was an SEO play for the sake of Google rankings and traffic. But again, Jim replies with, "No, the effect on traffic isn't important. We just need more content on the site." It took about 10 minutes of back and forth before it finally dawned on me that the reason for this effort was for the sake of a slide deck, a slideshow, when pitching investors on putting money into the company. Jim wanted to make a claim to potential investors. If the business had a large repository of content and a process for drafting, editing, and posting 5 new articles per week, he could sell those bullet points to investors. This made the company look larger and more established than it actually was. Assuming the investors cared, their offers and terms would weigh more heavily in the executive team's favor. By the way, none of these articles ever cleared 100 views. Most of them were seen by at most 20 people. The vast majority were topics that had already been covered by other content-focused websites that had budgets for copywriters and editors. Jim was explicit that he wanted the quantity of content to vastly outweigh the quality because the purpose was not for humans to read it. This was, by definition, socially useless labor. You might even call it bullshit work. Part 4. Capitalism Perverts. No, wait, that says pervert. You might look at what Jim did as bad or immoral or just strange. Why create useless filler content for no reason? You might even look at my reaction as strange. Why should I care about the quality of content produced by some organization? But Jim and I were following our own incentives. Given that he could stand to make more money with this bucket of shit, content, it was in his best interest for employees to make as much of it as possible. Meanwhile, as a rational and functional human being, I wanted to be proud of the things I create, and maybe help some fellow people. And since I was going to be paid the same amount regardless, it's natural for me to advocate for quality over quantity. It's just science. Obviously, we proceeded with Jim's plan, and the company created a lot of content that was completely worthless outside of pitch decks. This isn't isolated to my one example. Executives just like Jim are making decisions just like this in nearly every corporation at every moment. There's nothing inherent within capitalism that makes it important to make products that are useful to humans if big investor money follows technology fads instead. Money will always be more important than the interests of human workers or consumers. Just looking at the obvious stuff, billions of dollars were spent on NFTs and NFT infrastructure that's now virtually worthless. People had to build that. Across the short-lived industry, executives at dozens of NFT and NFT adjacent related companies, the fucking teleprompter is just too fast. Across the short-lived industry, executives at dozens of NFT and NFT adjacent companies paid thousands of employees to write tens of thousands of lines of code. It's now virtually worthless. In other words, unproductive work. Bullshit. Metaverse product Decentraland's daily unique visits are somewhere between 1,900 and 500. Before that finding, it was valued at $1.2 billion. Dozens of employees worked for years on this. Recently, YouTuber Jarvis Johnson found just 903 players in Meta's own Horizon world. Now Meta claims the player base is less than 200,000, which is technically accurate. By the way, Metaverse has cost the company $36 billion in the form of software and hardware engineers, along with all the accountants and human resources people and managers to support them. Hey, is that a metaphor? All told, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people worked on these projects for years. How many work years could have been spent on something that would actually help people instead? When someone tells you that capitalism maximizes productivity, is this their vision for the economy working as intended? What are the chances the workers knew these products were doomed to fail? What are the chances even 1 in 5 knew? Some of you may think the workers couldn't have had a clue whether the projects they were working on would amount to nothing. And to that I say, where do you get off? Imagine the audacity of telling anyone, a software engineer no less, but really anybody, that they couldn't possibly know better than an executive. Frankly, the absurdity of that idea speaks for itself. I'm 100% convinced that if you truly believe this, you cannot possibly have met more than a couple of people at the top. All the misnomers we use in the working world, executive is among the most insidious. And that's coming from someone who works in marketing, where we use like target and inbound and viral and analytics. Of the dozens of so-called executives I've met in my career, exactly 0 of them have been executed. And very few have done any actual executing of business tasks. When it comes down to it, a CEO's job is to maximize profits for shareholders. Part of that is interfacing with creditors like banks or investors to secure as much funding as possible. The more money a company has access to, the faster it can grow. So if a bank, a holding company, or a fund wants to cash in on the latest tech craze like NFTs or AI or some other bullshit, it's in the best interest of a CEO to pivot. Pivot! Meaning, make the company start producing that sort of bullshit. This is how we get $10 million ape JPEGs, or $36 billion video games with 900 players.
In the free market, an individual business owner has an incentive not to be wasteful because they want to maximize profit.
Or AI that loses $500 million every year and writes and draws like shit.
Entrepreneurs who have no choice but to concern themselves with the needs and desires of others.
It's in the C-suite's best interest to pay people like you and me to look like we're contributing to the current tech craze, regardless of how obvious it is that we're doing the next big fail. This results in the creation of a productivity facade, Hundreds of people performing work, but nothing being produced. In other words, no social benefit. Bullshit. In very literal terms, this is how CEOs secure funding and thereby increase their net worth. It's no wonder half of UK workers believe their work has no benefit to society. How would you feel if the work you're doing is in an area you're sure is failing in the next few years? The incentivization of unproductive work is the core of modern capitalism. Like rat tails, corporate executives pursue investor dollars, and investor dollars pursue fads and gimmicks rather than the creation of useful goods and services that real people want and benefit from. Part 5. So what? By now you may be thinking, who gives a shit? Sometimes people fall victim to hype, and they overinvest in what they've been convinced is like the next big thing. And usually, those people are rich idiots who lose some money and we all point and laugh and move on. But is rich people's money the only thing that's at stake here? Let's hear from one of the world's favorite capitalists. In his biography about the late Steve Jobs, author Walter Isaacson recounts a tale often repeated about Apple's infamous co-founder. Isaacson says,
"One day, Jobs marched into the cubicle of Larry Kenyon, the engineer who was working on the Macintosh operating system, and complained that it was taking too long to boot up. Kenyon started to explain why reducing the boot up time wasn't possible, but Jobs cut him off. If it would save a person's life, could you find a way to shave 10 seconds off the boot time, he asked. Kenyon allowed that he probably could. Jobs went to a whiteboard and showed that if 5 million people were using the Mac and it took 10 seconds extra to turn it on every day, that added to 3 million or so hours a year, the equivalent of at least 100 lifetimes a year. After a few weeks, Kenyon had the machine booting up 28 seconds faster."
There are about 2,000 work hours in a year, and 133 million full-time workers in the United States. Another 28 million people work part-time at an average of 35 hours a week. 77% of American employees commute every day to the tune of about 28 minutes one direction. Added up, Americans as a whole will devote more than 33 million years in service to capital over the next 12 months. By Steve Jobs' logic, that's 440,000 lives. And the research is telling us as many as 220,000 of them are wasted every year. That doesn't include all the meals we order because we're too spread thin to cook, or the child and senior care we pay for because there's no alternative, or the lawn care and home maintenance and oil changes we're perfectly capable of doing ourselves. Maybe some of us would even prefer to do ourselves if it wasn't for an omnipresent demand for our time and attention elsewhere. It also doesn't include our comrades around the world, like the slaves laboring for Starbucks coffee or Nike's child labor force, who are in much worse working conditions than ours, due in no small part to the worst parts of capitalism. How we allocate our time as a society doesn't happen in a vacuum. We're not choosing to either work for this rich guy or the other rich guy who are both hell-bent on gambling away your lifetime for slightly better odds and increasing their net worth. When we say "so what" to the mass eradication of our own time, what we give up is our ability to use our time as a collective force for good. Imagine an America that's more resilient because we use our Mondays to grow local food or set up neighborhood solar arrays, and on Fridays we spend more time being with friends and loved ones. I, for one, think it's wrong to rob people of their ability to improve the world they live in, and I believe that you think the same way. A better world is possible, but it does not lie in NFTs or corporate bureaucracy or even government bureaucracy. It's local. It's in your city, your neighborhood. but right now, a broken worldwide system that incentivizes roulette wheels and digital paperwork over your sacred time is holding that world back. That system is capitalism and the pursuit of GDP to the exclusion of human interests and your right to work productively. Because even capitalist economists can be right sometimes. The incentives that suffuse capitalism are indeed perverse. Okay, usually this is the part of the video where I ask you to subscribe to my Patreon and buy Raid Shadow Legends or whatever the fuck. I will say that if you enjoyed the video, please participate in YouTube's perverse incentives by hitting the like button. But as you may have guessed, I'm doing fine financially, at least at time of writing. I have no sponsor, no Patreon. I shot, wrote, and edited the video myself with the help of a really amazing script editor named Jessica. I only used my time, not my money, with the exception of a teleprompter. I did spend about 50 hours making it, though, so far. And in exchange, if you'd like to show your support financially, I'd like to ask you to donate to a cause I care about and that's relevant to the video. Below, you'll find a link to support the charity organization Children of Vietnam. Between June 2022 and July 23, the organization provided nearly 2 million meals to kids and clean water to another 7,000, along with helping provide assistance to 100 children with disabilities. Children of Vietnam has the highest rating possible, 4 stars, on Charity Navigator, and one of the things that stood out to me when doing my research was they have 3 employees in America supporting 9 employees in Vietnam. From the outside looking in, this worker ratio just gave me the impression they're not allowing clerical and administrative work and digital bureaucracy to get in the way of their real mission. If you saw this video and would have been willing to support me on Patreon this month, please spend that $5 or $10 on this organization instead. I don't have my own personalized donation link or anything of that nature. In fact, Children of Vietnam doesn't even know that this part of the video will be included. Just visit the website at the link and click donate. Okay. My sincerest thanks to everybody watching. My hope is this video helped you in some small way. Until next, I can do it. Until next time, friend. Remember, fuck. I fucked it up at the very end. Don't work too hard.